Hi, this is the second talk about the symbolic grammatical Bible code that we have been working on for the last 14 years. In the first talk we introduced you to two simple noun counting rules that every Bible account obeys. And by a Bible account we mean a scene in the Bible or a collection of related scenes. And the two rules simply stated are the total number of nouns acting as nouns in an account is divisible by the total number of meanings of that account, and the total number of distinct, that's rule one, total number of nouns acting as nouns divisible by total number of meanings, and rule two is the total number of distinct interpretable nouns or possessive noun chains, such as the house of the king, in an account is divisible by the total number of meanings of the account. And we also have three rules that tell us how many meanings each account has. The account has no extra meanings at all if it has no noun repeated an even number of times in it, and if it has no successive designations in it. It has one extra meaning if it has no successive designations but has a noun repeated an even number of times, and it has two or more extra meanings if it has a double or triple successive designation. And this sheet here has all of those rules on it. Very simple rules to verify, not so easy to formulate and deduce, but now that we've got them, we can easily prove that the Bible is in a code by just applying these two noun counting rules to all of the accounts. And we've done in the Bible what we can. We've so far done that for the first 225 now accounts in the Gospels, sequentially, starting with Matthew 1, so that we haven't cherry-picked the ones that work. Alright, so now, let me just say one more thing before we get it. The purpose of this talk, is to show you us playing football rather than to read you the rules of football. Because it's much easier to understand the game when you watch people playing it than it is by reading the rule book of the referee. And so the first talk was kind of the rule book. This time we're going to actually go through a whole bunch of accounts and show you precisely how we've verified these noun counting checks to speed up your grasp of how we do this. But I do want to say one thing, which is this. When you're doing these noun counts, sometimes you reach an account and it looks like it doesn't count. Everything seems to be perfect except one thing. And we found whenever that's occurred that there's something new we need to learn. And it's as if God, I know I'm being a bit theocratic here, but it's as if God says to us 1, 2, 3, 99, 5, 6, 7. There are two ways of looking at that. You can say, ha! God can't count, he can't do a sequence, there's no code, it's all meaningless, let's give up. Or you can say, wait a minute, he's basically said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is an incredible sequence of numbers, you know, nothing random, there's definitely a pattern there, but one of the numbers doesn't quite fit the pattern, there must be a reason for that. And by taking that view, you can call it faith, you can call it sort of blind belief, you can call it what you want, but it's a positive way of looking at it rather than a negative way. And we have found that God actually, that's his MO. He will say 1, 2, 3, 99, 5, 6, 7. He won't say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's too easy. He wants you to do some work too. That's where the 99 comes in, if you see what I mean. It's a bit like the ice skater who does a perfect routine but falls over once. Just because she falls over once, it doesn't mean she can't ice skate. You don't ignore all the triple toe loops and double axels and just concentrate, like the cameras do, on her one fall. You know, she's an Olympic quality ice skater. And that is worth keeping that in mind. For example, if it was true that out of the 220 Bible accounts that we verified these noun counts on, 10 of them we'd actually made mistakes on, it would still prove that we had the code. It just would prove that we don't have the code precisely. Because really, there's a 1 in 9 chance on average of our counts working, so they should only work on 30 out of 220 accounts. Right, so to the first account, right, the simplest and the most basic of them all. It's Matthew 13:52. And I'll read it to you. It's a parable. The kingdom of the heavens is like a man, a householder, who brings out of his treasure new things and old things. The Greek doesn't just says new, it uses the adjectives new and old substantively, with implied nouns of things. So that account has three nouns: man, householder, and treasure. And a man, a householder, is a double designation. It's two designations for this man, one after the other. It's a successive designation. So the parable has two extra meanings, or three meanings in total. So the total number of nouns must be divisible by 3, and it's 3, which is divisible by 3. And the total number of unique nouns, or unique interpretable nouns, distinct nouns, again, is 3, man, householder, and treasure, which is also divisible by 3. So there's the simplest count you can do. So there's a simple one to get us started. Now we'll move on to Luke 10:21 to 22, which is another small account. Sorry, I've just got to move the computer over there with my sticky mouse. Luke 10. Okay. It says, in this very hour, he became overjoyed in the Spirit, the Holy. That's a double designation. It's in orange because it's a double designation. And said, I publicly praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and of earth. That's a double designation. He's Father and he's Lord of heaven and earth, successively. Because you've carefully hidden these things from the wise ones and intellectual ones and have revealed them to the babes or pre-speech ones. This is a very literal translation here. O Father, because to do this came to be the technique approved by you. All things have been delivered to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and who the Father is except the Son, and the one to whom the Son is willing to reveal him. That account has in it 12 nouns: our, Spirit, Father, Lord, Father, technique, Father, Son, Father, Father, Son, Son. There's 12. It has 3 threads because it has it has a double designation. In fact, it has 2 double designations. And so the total number of nouns, which we call the CNC, the countable noun count, is 12. There are 3 meanings, and 12 is divisible by 3. The total number of individual nouns in that account, we have our, Spirit, Father, Lord of heaven and of earth. That's a noun, possessive noun chain, Lord of heaven. And technique and Son is 6, and 6 is likewise divisible by 3. I mean, the Gospels are very parallel. Accounts are often repeated in other Gospels. And this account here that I've just read you in Luke, there's a similar account in Matthew 11. However, that account did not happen at the same time. It is not parallel. I'm not actually going to prove that now. But that is nonetheless the case. We'll look at some other parallel accounts where I do prove if they're parallel or not from the literal meaning of the scriptures. Alright, so I'm just introducing it now to have some further examples of noun counting to get you familiar with how it works. Incidentally, let me say this. It's all based on the Greek, and I've made a translation of, this is an interlinear Greek Bible. This is one published by the Jehovah's Witnesses, although they don't ever hardly use it. They use their English Bible translation, which isn't as good. And it has the original Greek, which is actually the Westcott and Hort Greek, and it has the English interlinear translation underneath it. And I've made these noun-preserving English translations in order to do these noun counts. Now, if you're concerned that the particular Greek text that Westcott and Hort decided to base their Bible on, which was basically the Vatican B manuscript, isn't necessarily the canonical one, then you can get a book such as this, which is by Hodges and Farstad, which is it basically is a comparative text of all the Greek New Testament codexes, and it shows you how they differ. So you can see how they differ, and in general they don't really differ in nouns, they differ in other things. They don't differ very much at all, but where they do differ is not generally nouns. There's very few cases where the codex actually makes a difference to the noun count. One of them is John 8, which we talked about I think in the last talk, where Jesus said that him who's without sin cast the first stone. That is canonical, you can tell it from the code. And the Vatican B had that removed from it. Incidentally, this is a daft way, that they have this theory that the correct Bible is the one that the correct Bible you can deduce by taking sort of democratically the form of a scripture which appears in more texts, the majority text they call it, which means that the particular format of that verse that is most common in all of the codexes must be the canonical one. From a theological standpoint, that is really daft, because there is going to be one true text and a bunch of fakes, and if you therefore take the majority, you're bound to get the fakes. But that's only a theological viewpoint, and this is supposed to be a non-theological talk. So, right. But anyway, just to show where we get it from. We get it from the original Greek. We translate it in a noun-preserving way into English, and that's all on the website, truebiblecode.com. And if you don't believe that we've done that right, you can get one of these comparative codex books and see how all the other codexes differ from the one that we've used, which is the Westcott and Hall Greek Codex. But they don't differ much in nouns, hardly at all in fact. So now let's have a look at Luke 2, 36 to 38. And this one says, "And there was Anna, a prophetess, a daughter of Phanuel," which is a triple designation, triple successive designation, "out of the tribe of Asher. This one had advanced in days many, and had lived with a male husband, for 7 years from her virginity. And she had been a widow until 84 years, who was never missing from of the temple," this is an interlinear translation, "rendering sacred service night and day by fastings and supplications. And in that very hour she came near and began returning thanks to God and speaking about the child implied to all those waiting for the deliverance of Jerusalem." So now all the words here in, first of all we have a triple designation, so there are 3 extra meanings and 4 meanings in total. The literal meaning of this account and 3 greater meanings, 4 meanings. And the total number of nouns is 16, and the total number of distinct nouns is 16. And 16 is divisible by 4. And 2 noun counting rules verified again. But let me go into a bit more detail here. All of the nouns in brown are genitive possessives. Tribe of Asher. Asher is a noun, but it's acting as an adjective, as a possessive genitive. Missing from of the temple, again, is that's an adverb actually. Missing from is a Greek verb, and of the temple is describing that verb, the way in which he's missing. So temple is being used as they do this, the Greeks, they use nouns as adverbs. So, but, and 84 of years, again that's a possessive noun, and deliverance of Jerusalem, Jerusalem is used possessively. So what you need to do when you go through these accounts is first of all get all the nouns, then see which ones are genitive and which ones aren't. If they aren't genitive, they're going to count. If they are genitive, they may or may not count, depending on the usage. And if they're used possessively, they don't count. If they're genitive because of an improper preposition or a preposition in front of them, they do count, because they're acting really as nouns. If they're genitive due to a comparison, like the lesser of the men or something, or the lesser of the cities, or the greater of the vegetables, then they don't count. Now all the rules for whether genitives are possessive or not, whether they count or not, are in understanding 49 of BibleDecoded.com, of TrueBibleCode.com. Sorry, TrueBibleCode.com, understanding 49 has all the rules, and you can just see them on the web. The most latest form. There's 27 in total rules we've come up with. But the genitives are basically, you only do not count a genitive if it's a possessive adjective, if it's an adverb, a possessive adverb, or if it's a comparative genitive. All the other ones count, is how it works. So when you've eliminated the particular genitives that don't act as nouns, then all the other genitives do count. So that's the process you have to go through. You have to identify the nouns, identify the genitive nouns, and determine whether they're being used possessively, or whether they're being used comparatively, or whether they're being used adverbially. And that takes a while to get used to. But the rules aren't that difficult once you've got them. All right. Now there's one other technicality which this account brings up. When you're counting the number of individual nouns, which again is 16 in this account, there are two special cases that occur. Sometimes you can have one word that takes two different meanings, such as day in this account. Day is used here, night and day, to mean like a 12-hour, the part of the day, the light part of the day. And day is also used, she advanced in days to mean a 24-hour day. And when one word has two meanings, it has each of the meanings of that word has an individual noun count. So day counts twice. In fact, it counts as days and as day, because it takes two different meanings. Likewise, the other way round, if you have two different Greek words that take the same meaning, they only have one interpretable noun count. Because they only have one symbolic interpretation. So, for instance, there's a parable with the word loan and debt in it. They're different Greek words, but they only have one interpretation. When you've interpreted one, you've interpreted the other. And also there's another account which has need and want in it. And when you've symbolically interpreted need, you've interpreted want. I mean, the Greek words actually mean loan or debt, and mean need or want. But there are two different words in Greek meaning loan or debt, and two different words in Greek meaning need or want. And so those are the, I mean, ideally you have a one-to-one relationship between Greek word and Greek meaning, and then everything is easy. The special case is when you have, and this is why I was talking earlier about the I stance so it falls over, or 1, 2, 3, 99, 5, 6, 7. When you're decoding, you have to deal with all these special cases. And the special cases in the individual noun count, which is 16 in this particular account, are that one Greek word can have two literal meanings, or two Greek words can have the same literal meaning. And in those cases, it's the literal meanings that count, not the words. Right, now let's look at the next one we're going to look at, which is Luke 1, 5 to 22. This one, again, has a triple designation. Verse 5 says, in the days of Herod, king of Judea, and days there is your noun, and of Herod is possessive, and king of Judea is more possessive stuff, because it's actually a double designation for Herod, but it's a possessive double designation. It's not acting as a noun, and so that does not give you two extra meanings. A double designation needs to be acting as a noun to give you two meanings, not as a possessive adjective. This is all covered in Understanding 49. It says, there happened to be a priest, a certain one, Zechariah in name. That's three ways, that is a triple designation for Zechariah. A priest, a certain one, Zechariah in name. So this account therefore has 4 meanings in total. 3 extra meanings and 1 literal meaning. And the total number of nouns in it is 68 divisible by 4, and the total number of individual nouns, or noun chains, is 40 divisible by 4. And now in this account there's also a double designation, Gabriel, the one having been standing alongside you, implied, use implied there. But the rule says that you go with the largest successive designation. So this has 4 meanings. If it didn't have a priest a certain one, Zechariah, in name, and it only had Gabriel, the one having been standing alongside, it would have a double designation and only have 3 meanings. But because it has a triple designation, it has 4 meanings. Now you can see in brown all of the possessive nouns. Most of them are just genitives, you know, others of the priesthood, sanctuary of the Lord, hour of the incense, angel of the Lord, power of Elijah, hearts of fathers. They're all straightforward possessive genitives, not acting as nouns. But there's one peculiarity in this account, the word multitude. There are very few words, number, multitude, and I can't remember the others, which you cannot symbolically interpret. There is no symbolic interpretation to the word number, it just means number. And multitude means a large number, and there's no symbolic interpretation to that. So multitude, although it counts as a noun in the CNC, the countable noun count, the total number of nouns, it does not count in the interpretable noun count because it's not interpretable. However, in this case, it doesn't just appear as multitude, it appears as multitude of the people in verse 10. And so it's associated with, and this possessive noun chain, you'd have to interpret people. But we also have people appearing by itself. And so we only have, once we've interpreted people, which does have an individual noun count for it being a noun, used as a noun, we have multitude of the people because multitude is non-interpretable and people we already have. So that's the peculiarity of that account. So we do not count the phrase, we do not count the noun chain multiple of the people because we already know what people is and one doesn't have to interpret multitude, it just means large number. It's invariant in symbolism. Right, so that was the peculiarity of that account. Now we're going to look at Luke 2, 39 to 52. This is the story of Jesus in the temple when he was 12, speaking to, he's 11 and a half by our counting actually, speaking to, 12 by Hebrew counting, speaking to the Pharisees. I'm trying to pick simple accounts. There are a few possessive nouns here: law of the Lord, grace of God, festival of the Passover, custom of the festival, 12 of years. In verse 49 we have, did you not know that I must be in the of my Father? Greeks love to leave out what they regard to be obvious words, and there's an omitted noun, you know, I must be in the business, the affairs of my Father, the activities of my Father, but the word affairs is omitted. But it's still, my Father is nonetheless still a possessive genitive. So the total number of nouns in this account is 39 when you add them all up. There is a double designation, Jesus the boy. In verse 43 it says, and having completed the days, whilst they were returning, Jesus the boy remained in Jerusalem, although remained is again implied, not stated. And his parents did not know it. So anyway, Jesus the boy is a double designation, so the account has 3 total meanings. So the total number of nouns, 39, is divisible by 3. And the total number of interpretable nouns or noun chains, the INC stands for interpretable noun chains, is 30. And I don't think we have any special cases here. It all works in a straightforward way. So that's quite a simple account to verify these noun counting rules with. There's one slight technicality in verse 39, the word os in Greek, which means as or like. It can be used metaphorically to make a comparison, comparatively. If it is, then the stuff it's comparing, the words that it compares, are symbolic and would not count in a literal noun count. Or it can be used temporally, and meaning when, as and when. And in this case it's used temporally, as soon as they finished all the things according to the law of the Lord. So that's, in other words, when they finished, or when they had finished all the things according to the law of the Lord. So, I mean, here it's not comparatively, and therefore we don't have to interpret some of these nouns symbolically. We'll see in some accounts we're going to look at soon that obviously some of the speech Jesus made, even the literal speech, had symbolic nouns in it, and symbolic nouns do not count in the literal noun count. And so there is room to fix the counts, if you're so inclined, by regarding nouns as symbolic. You get to learn which ones are and which aren't, and so we haven't fixed them. All right, now we're going to have a look at Mark 3, 7 to 12. I'll just get there with this. Okay, this is about having a boat ready for Jesus. Now verse 11, we have even the spirits, the unclean. That is a double designation. Now I know in the Greek you would translate that as the unclean spirits, and you don't think of it as a double designation, you just think of it as a noun, spirit, with an adjective, unclean. But there are several ways Greek has of expressing unclean spirits. It could indeed say, literally, the unclean spirits. It could say unclean spirits. It could say these spirits unclean, or it could say these spirits the unclean. Now, when it says these spirits the unclean, it means these spirits the unclean ones. In other words, it's using unclean substantively, and that's why this is a double designation. A simpler way, rather than going into the grammar, is you learn that if it's the soul, the fine, or the spirits, the unclean, that form, it's the that makes it substantive, actually. If it said the spirits, the ones possessing people, that would also be a double designation. It's the and the implied ones that makes it another designation, actually. So this has a double designation, and it has a total of 18 nouns, and it has 3 meanings because of the double designation, and 18 is divisible by 3, and it has 15 individual interpretable noun chains. The INC is 15. The special case is multitude, again, which has it's not interpretable, it just means large number. In verse 7 it says, and Jesus with his disciples withdrew to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee and from Judea followed him. And that multitude is a non-interpretable noun. It has no INC because it just means a large number in any literal or symbolic meaning. So that was quite a straightforward one. Now let me take you to Luke 9, 51 to 56. Right. This is the story of James and John, Boanerges, calling fire down on a Samaritan village that wasn't interested in Jesus' preaching. Here we have the disciples, in verse 54, the disciples, James and John. That is it's a plural, but it's again a double designation. It's like the disciple John. That would be a double designation for John. This is the disciples, James and John, which is a double designation for James and John. So it has 3 threads. It has 2 extra word symbolic meanings from that double designation, making 3 meanings in total. And the total number of nouns in the account is 15, and 15 is divisible by 3, and the total number of individual nouns is 12, and 12 is divisible by 3. And the only genitive in there is Samaritans, into a village of Samaritans. That's a possessive genitive, it counts as an adjective. The rest of the nouns just count as nouns, and so it's not difficult to count. 15 nouns, 12 of them individual. Faces repeated twice, and Jerusalem is repeated once. So there was a simple one. Now we'll move to Luke 10. The reason actually a lot of these are in Luke is Luke has a lot of accounts which aren't parallel. Once we've done these, we'll go into some parallel accounts. The Gospels are full of those parallel accounts. And the trick is to work out whether they are truly parallel or not. So we'll go to Luke 10, 38 to 42, which is the account of Mary and Martha. I hope you're getting the hang of how we do this. So, here, let me read it to you. In their journey, he entered into a village, a certain one. That is a double designation. A woman, but a certain one, Martha in name, received him into their house. Now that looks like a triple designation. A woman, but a certain one, Martha in name. Especially as the Greeks put but and lots of other words second in the sentence, when really in English we'd have it first in the sentence. So you would translate this, but a woman, a certain one, Martha in name, received him into the house. However, this is a grammatical code. It isn't a successive designation because there's a but in the way. And, you know, it's a straightforward grammatical code. They need to be successive. If there's a but in there, they aren't successive. So this isn't a triple designation. It's actually a double designation. If the but wasn't there, it would be a woman, a certain one, Martha in name, a triple designation. But because the but is there, it's just a certain one, Martha in name, a double designation. So that means that this account, and then further on in verse 41 we have Martha, Martha, which is of course a double designation for Martha. And the Bible has lots of stuff like that. Moses, Moses, Abraham, Abraham, Martha, Martha. So there are three meanings to this account. So the total number of nouns is divisible by 3, and there are 18 of them. And the total number of individual noun, interpretable noun chains is divisible by 3 as well, and there are 12 of them, which is divisible by 3. Now, the one special thing about this account is the word portion. In verse 42, the account says, "For Mary chose the good portion." Now, portion is a Greek word for a physical, real portion. But Jesus didn't mean it physically real. She didn't choose a piece of land or a part of a whole, physical whole. She chose a metaphorical portion, a part of sort of religious activities. Or in fact, in her case, it was, well, just, I suppose it is religious activities. So portion is used metaphorically, it's used symbolically here. And so it doesn't count in the literal noun count. Because in fact, there are 19 nouns in this account, but one of them is used symbolically. Now, at this point you could say, but then you can fix any noun count you like by just saying, that noun must be symbolic. And indeed, when we started doing this, we tended to do that. But we've now learned which nouns are symbolic and which nouns aren't symbolic. Furthermore, if there are a lot of symbolic nouns in an account, it will have each account obeys the symbolic nouns, but obey rules too. In this particular account, they don't, because there's no symbolic sub-account. But if there's a whole parable embedded in a literal account, then that parable has a symbolic noun count as well. And so you are constrained as to what you can do with this. But it's not too hard to see that portion is used metaphorically here. And therefore it doesn't count in the symbolic noun count. Right, now we're going to move on to Mark 3, 1 to 6, which is parallel to Luke 6, 1 to 11. I'll go to Mark 1. Right, so this is the story of Jesus curing a man with a withered hand in the synagogue. And we're looking at this to show you how parallel accounts work in the scriptures. So Mark 1 to 6 tells you that it was on a Sabbath and Jesus cured him, and the Pharisees, of course, looking for any excuse to do him down out of jealousy, weren't interested in curing the man with the withered hand. They were interested in condemning Jesus for curing him. It has 14 nouns in it, and it has a double designation in verse 3. The man, the one having the withered hand, that's a double designation in orange. And So it's got 3 threads, but it has only 14 nouns, and the individual noun count of Mark is 8. So the account doesn't count properly. The reason it doesn't count properly is it's got a parallel account, and you have to combine it with the noun counts with the parallel account to get it to count right. And this is how the code tells you whether an account has a parallel or not. If it counts perfectly, it doesn't, in both in the CNC and the INC, the countable noun count, the total number of nouns, and the individual noun chains, the total number of interpretable individual nouns. If it counts perfectly, it hasn't got a parallel. If it counts imperfectly, it has got a parallel account. So we'll now look at Luke and see which is the parallel account, and see what's going on there. Am I right? Yes, in fact, the interesting thing here is that there's also a similar account in Matthew 12, but that isn't parallel. And I'm going to take you through all of this to show you that. We'll now look at Luke. Right, it's Luke 6 to 11. Now that has 16 nouns in it. It also has a double designation. Incidentally, with parallel accounts, it's the largest designation, successive designation in either of the accounts that are parallel that determines the number of threads, the number of meanings of the set of parallel accounts. So, in fact, there's a double designation in Mark and one in Luke. So, the pair of them have 3 threads. Now, there are 16 nouns in countable nouns in Luke, and there are 10 individual nouns. So, if you add the two together, going back to Mark now, you end up with 30, which is divisible by 3. And if you look at all of the individual nouns, then there are 12 in total, which is divisible by 3. Now, so it looks like these two could be parallel, but we need to look at Matthew as well, Matthew 12. Okay, this is Matthew 12, 9 to 13. It's another account of Jesus curing a guy with a withered hand in the synagogue. This one very similar account, and it has 8 nouns in it. It doesn't have a double designation, so it only has 2, but it does have nouns that are repeated an even number of times. For instance, man appears 4 times, and hand appears twice. There are 10 nouns in this account. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And there are 4 individual nouns: synagogue, man, hand, Sabbaths. Yeah. All right. So, 10 is divisible by 2, and so is 4. So this thing counts by itself. So the code is telling us this is a standalone account. It doesn't have a parallel. In other words, it's saying this is not a parallel account. This is a different. I mean, if Jesus can cure a guy with a withered hand in a synagogue, he can do it on 2 occasions. And what the code is telling us is this is a different occasion to the occasion of Luke and Mark, because Luke and Mark don't count correctly, but when you add them up, they do, whereas Matthew does count correctly. And just to show we haven't made all of this up, and the code is actually telling us something useful, you can actually deduce that from the wording of the parables too, because in verse 9 in Matthew, it says, he departed from there and went into the synagogue. And from there is the previous account, which is about on a Sabbath, the disciples were eating the grain in the fields. So they went from the fields eating grain. On the Sabbath, they were eating the grain in the fields, straight to the synagogue, and Jesus cured a man with a withered hand. And you're told in verse 9 that these 2 events occurred on the same day. But if we now go to Luke, the first verse of Luke is, now it happened in a different Sabbath to the grain picking, which is above. In Luke chapter 6, verse 1 to 5, we read about, again, a parallel account of the disciples going through grain fields and eating grain. And the point is made by the Holy Spirit in verse, or by the Bible in verse 6. that this was on that then on a different Sabbath to the Sabbath when they're eating the grain heads, walking through the fields, Jesus killed this guy in a synagogue. Whereas in Matthew, it's on the same Sabbath, assuming that the three parables of eating the grain in the fields happened at the same time. But really, it would be illogical to make the distinction that is made in Luke that the guy in the synagogue having his withered hand cured was on a different Sabbath to the grain fields, and then say in Matthew it's on the same Sabbath if there were two different Sabbaths for the grain fields, if you see what I mean. And also, it's unlikely that Jesus would have his disciples hungry on two occasions of Sabbaths in a grain field. But the point is, the Holy Spirit is at pains to point out that in Luke, that the withered hand curing was on a different Sabbath to the grain plucking, whereas in Matthew it was on the same Sabbath. And so, in other words, they were different events, which confirms what the code is saying, which is that the account in Matthew is not a parallel story, a parallel account of the same event. I mean, with literal parallel accounts, it has to be the accounts are parallel if it's two different sort of journalists describing exactly the same event. But Jesus, killed many people with withered hands, and many lame people, and many demonically possessed people he killed, and blind people. And so there can be several accounts of the same thing on different occasions, as well as several different journalistic accounts of the same event. And so this example of the withered hand being killed in Matthew, Mark and Luke is a classic example of how the code shows whether an account is parallel or not. And the account in Matthew is not parallel, but the account in Mark and Luke, those two are parallel. And that's why the account in Matthew counts perfectly, but the two accounts in Mark and Luke do not count perfectly. They count complementarily. And when you put them together, they do count perfectly. So I just wanted to introduce you to parallel accounts by that means. And another classic one, which I've referred to in the previous talk, is the feeding of the 5,000. There are 4 accounts of that. 2 of them in Matthew and Mark are parallel, and 2 of them in John and Luke happened at a different time. Matthew and Mark was before the evening, and John and Luke was after the evening. So, and also the counting confirms that, but the scriptures likewise confirm that they are parallel. Right, now I want to look at the big picture, really, Matthew 18, which is a whole account, and show you how symbolic and literal interface, and this is really the maximum complexity we've managed to deal with so far with this counting. In Matthew 18, we have a literal. This is one of the few accounts in the Bible where the account actually is the chapter. I mean, the chapterization is all wrong, basically, or most of it, certainly in the New Testament. Some of the versation is wrong, and none of it's canonical. It's just some monk deciding to do it that way and the Catholic Church accepting it. There are some accounts that start in the middle of a verse. I mean, there are some verses which aren't proper sentences, etc. But Matthew 18, the whole of Matthew 18 is a standalone literal account, which is nice. Now, it actually has in it 2 parables. It has the parable of the lost sheep, from verse 12 to 14, and that parable has a parallel parable in Luke, and it has the parable of the guy who owed a load of money and the king let him off his debt, but he wouldn't let the guy who owed him a little bit of money off of his debt. So, debt relief parable it has. Now, the way this all works is that the literal part of the account, all the nouns in the literal part of the account, you add them all up and we get 50 of them. And that's divisible by 2. So in the literal account, there isn't a double designation. Yeah. And the total number of interpretable noun chains is 30, which is likewise divisible by 2. But the parables themselves have their own noun counts. So, for example, the parable of the guy who owed a fortune to the king, the debt relief parable, that has a symbolic noun count, and the symbolic nouns are in green, of 24. and it has a double designation, a man, a king. And it has an individual, a symbolic interpretable noun count, sync, of 12. And there are some special things to consider in that count. But the parable counts itself as a standalone symbolic account. The symbolic nouns count and obey the same two rules that the literal nouns of the entire chapter obey. Only in the case of this parable, there are three meanings, therefore the SCNC is divisible by 3, 24, and the SINC is divisible by 3, 12. Now, in the case of the lost sheep, there are three nouns, man, sheep and mountains, in the parable in Matthew, and there are 6 nouns in the parable, the parallel parable in Luke. The total number of nouns is 9, and there's a double designation. And it's just occurred to me that it counts okay by itself. Man, sheep, mountains. 3. Although Luke doesn't count okay by itself. I had a reason for this at one point. Not quite sure what it was. Interesting. I wonder if a certain one, a man, is not a double designation. Right, let's look at Luke. Right, so in Luke we have man, sheep, shoulders, house, neighbours, sheep. So we have a CNC of 6. And we have an INC of 5, so that doesn't count properly. Alright. But we have a total number of nouns of 6 and individual nouns of 5. And that's the parable of the lost sheep in Luke. Yeah, I think I've counted this wrong. I think that parable is probably welded to the parable below it about the woman who loses a drachma, because it's about losing things when you've got lots of them. Yeah, I counted it wrong. Great. Alright, sometimes you get two parables. If two parables describe the same thing, then just as there are two related scenes, they count as one thing. So actually, Luke is not parallel to Matthew, because Matthew counts okay by itself. So there you go, I found a mistake. So this is, well, it makes it even simpler, Matthew 18. Here's the parable of the lost sheep. In Matthew, it's got 3 nouns in it, man, sheep and mountains. It's got 3 threats, and it's exactly like that Matthew 13:52. It's another one of those. And the parable in Luke is followed by a woman losing a drachma, which is another parable about losing something. And so the two parables in Luke combine to form one symbolic account, which is not parallel to this, because it counts fine by itself. So in other words, the code is telling us, by the fact that this counts fine, that it is not parallel, and since the parable in Luke doesn't count of the lost sheep itself, you know it must be joined to something, and you look below it, and guess what? There's some other woman losing something, rather like a shepherd lost something. So again, the code is helping you to understand the scripture. I didn't prepare any of that, that was real time. Alright, so it's all very simple. We've got 3 nouns there. Actually, it screws up. Right. And the symbolic count works for the parable of the lost sheep, it works for the parable of the guy owing a fortune, and the literal counts work for the entire account, although the account itself has some symbolic nouns in it. For instance, it refers to Gehenna, which is a symbolic representation of hell. And in verse 3 it says, unless you turn around and become as a little child, then you certainly will not enter into the kingdom of God. So little child is used comparatively, so it's in green, it's symbolic. And the symbolic words are little children, little child, fire and Gehenna. And also brother is used symbolically here. It doesn't mean genetic brother, it means Because Peter says to Jesus, Lord, how many times is my brother to sin against me and am I to forgive him? He doesn't mean his genetic brother. He means his any sort of neighbour, any male person, I suppose, or even female person. So the whole count, literally, we have 70, let me get this right, we have 78 literal nouns in this account. And the total number of interpretable noun chains is 42, both divisible by 3. Sorry, when I said earlier that the CNC was 50, that was just for part of the account. So those are both divisible by 3, so there must be a double designation in the literal part of this account. And there is, it's the fire, the indefinitely lasting, even though fire is symbolic, it's a symbolic word in the literal part of the account, and therefore the literal account does have 3 meanings. Alright, now now I'm going to introduce you to the third witness, which we don't need to prove the Bible's in a code, but just to show you how amazing this book is. Not only is it true that the total number of symbolic nouns in each parable obeys the CNC and the INC rules, and not only is it true that all the literal nouns in the whole chapter obey the CNC and INC rules, but the symbolic nouns in the whole chapter across different non-related parables also obey the rules. And in fact, the total number of symbolic nouns in this account we did have as 48, but 6 of them don't apply, because the parable of the lost sheep is not parallel, as I'd earlier thought, so it's actually 42, but that's divisible by 3. And the INC is 21, although we've got to take out the individual nouns from the parallel parable in Luke, and how many of those were there? There were 3, because we've got 3 here. Fine. So we take 3 away from the figure here of 21 and we end up with 18. So you see that the total number, so this is the incredible thing about this account. Total number of literal nouns divisible by 3. Total number of individual literal nouns divisible by 3. For each parable of the lost sheep and the man owning a fortune, total number of symbolic nouns divisible by 3. Total number of individual nouns divisible by 3. Then, for the whole account as one thing, total number of symbolic nouns divisible by 3, and total number of individual symbolic nouns divisible by 3. Now, that doesn't always happen. This is a third witness. Now, there's a biblical, the famous biblical part of the law, and also applies to Christian congregations. You do not judge a man except on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, you've got to have 2 witnesses, and the 2 witnesses to the Bible code are the CNC count and the INC count. But there can be a third witness in circumstances where you have symbolic and literal words in the same account. And that third witness is that the CNC and the INC work across the entire account for the symbolic nouns, but they don't have to, and they can equal the number of threads in any one of the symbolic sub-accounts or the literal account. It's a bit complicated. It just happens in this account that the literal number of threads is 3, and both parables have 3 threads. So the total number of symbolic words has to obey has to be divisible by 3, because both parables have 3 meanings, and so does the literal account have 3 meanings. So this third witness looks a bit more spectacular than it actually is in this account. All right, now I'm going to give you a special treat, and then I'm going to stop. The special treat is Matthew chapter 1. This is a whole long list of people, and it's got 99 nouns in it, and it has 51 individual nouns, and there's a technicality that I won't go into, but you can read about it if you wish. And it has 3 meanings, because there's a double designation. David the king, and another double designation, Joseph the husband of Mary, and another double designation, Jesus the one called Christ. And so here's a genealogy of Jesus which has 3 meanings, and what I'm going to do now, which I shouldn't really do because this is supposed to be logical and not theocratic, but I'll do it anyway, is give you the other 2 meanings. The first one is that this is, the first extra meaning is that this is a born-again genealogy from Abraham to Jesus. They were all born again in spirit. So it's not just your physical genetic flesh birth, it's your angelic born-again birth. That's the first word symbolic meaning. All of these characters from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, Perez, Hezron, Ram, etc. to David, down to Joseph, born again. Then there's one more meaning, which is the big picture, which is this is the angelic descent of the angel Michael. It is his heavenly genealogy, and he was the 42nd angel, 42nd generation angel from Abraham, who was one of the brothers of Satan. Satan was the firstborn angel, not Michael. Michael became the firstborn angel when he died on the stake. And there are 3 women in this account, and they are female angels. And their names are Ruth, Rahab, and Tamar, which means date palm. We know that those are their real heavenly names, although in the heavenly language, because the words only appear once in the account, so they have no greater meaning. So there are 3 heavenly women angels called date palm, large, and satisfying. And one imagines date palm invented the date palm. So that was a piece of fun, and thanks for listening.